It is a cold and dreary day outside here in Alabama. So I'm just spending the morning in my study here, going through my Tasha Tudor book and a couple of my other favorite books, just for a little garden inspiration for the year. Tasha Tudor is one of my most favorite garden designers, and sometimes I love to just sit here and just go through my books, and it just gives me ideas and inspiration. I've been working out in my garden, in the potager garden, getting things cleaned up, getting ready for spring planting, and I'm hoping that it's going to warm up enough today that I can get out there and do a little more work. I've got a lot of weeds to pull and a lot of compost to spread to get the garden ready to plant here real soon. And I am looking forward to spring. I am really ready for spring. Even though we haven't had a hard winter at all, there's only really been just a few cold days. But I am ready for spring and ready to get the garden alive and bursting like this. Isn't that beautiful? So dreamy. Oh wow, look at this one. Isn't that gorgeous? Those iris and poppies and foxgloves. Oh my gosh, this is what I'm dreaming of my gardens looking like one day. Tasha Tudor says it takes a good 10 years for your garden before it becomes mature and magnificent. So I'm waiting for the day when my garden is full and lush and beautiful like this, all around my house, all in the potager garden. I'm dreaming of this. I've had quite a few of you tell me that you're starting a potager garden this year or a kitchen garden this year, and you've requested that I give you some information about how to design and start a potager garden and how I started my potager garden. So over the next few weeks, I'm going to do a little video series here all about the potager garden. So I'm going to break it up into episodes because it's too much information to try to fit all into one or even two videos. So the first episode, which is right now, we're going to talk about what is a potager garden and the history behind the potager garden. And the next episode, episode 2, we're going to look at elements of a potager garden. What are some of the elements or characteristics that define a potager garden? The third episode, we're going to look at designing a potager garden, steps that you can take and follow to help you in designing your potager garden. The fourth episode, we're going to look at steps that you can actually take and implement to create your potager garden. In the fifth episode, we're going to look at some of the plants that you would find in a potager garden, some of the plants that I've included in my potager garden, and some of the plants that you can include in your potager garden. I think a great place to start is to talk about the correct pronunciation of the word potager. Now, I've heard it pronounced many different ways. Some are just totally not the correct way, but potager is the way that I've heard it pronounced the most, and I think it's the correct way to pronounce it, potager. Now, I've heard the English and the French pronounce it as potager, and I love that. I think that is so beautiful, but it's already kind of comical to hear this Southern Alabama girl pronounce potager. So I think to go and start trying to say potager would just be hilarious. So I'm going to stick with the way that I believe that I've heard it pronounced the most, and the way that I believe is the correct pronunciation of the word potager. What is a potager garden? A potager garden is just basically a kitchen garden. It's a garden that grows everything that you need to care for your family. And The beauty of the garden feeds your soul.
Potager in French means the soup pot. And the word potager, P-O-T-A-G-E-R, actually comes from the Middle French word potager, P-O-T-G-I-E-R, which was a cook that makes a thick soup, or a potage. P-O-T-T-A-G-E, potage. Potage was a very common meal in Europe in the medieval times. The peasants would pretty much just take whatever they could, whatever they had a means to, they would take it and just put it all in a pot and make a really thick soup. So it would be a mixture of vegetables and herbs and meat and whatever that they had means to get. And a lot of times the peasants, their gardens were just in their yards because they had little tiny homes and little tiny yards, and they had to use every piece of property that they had to grow what they needed to sustain themselves. So whatever yard they had was actually a garden. So the idea of the potager garden is to just walk out your kitchen door with a basket in hand and harvest whatever was available and ready, and that's what your meal was. And that's where the soup pot comes from, the potager. They would just take whatever they had available, throw it all in a pot, and that would be their meal for the day. So that's where the soup pot, the potage, the potager, that's where all of that comes from. Potager gardens date all the way back to medieval monastery gardens, and the monks created these gardens out of a necessity to grow medicine, for healing, and for food for people. Now, the original design of the potager was basically just 4 square shapes, and each bed had one mass planting of one herb, and that was the original design of the potager garden. It was believed that these 4 square beds represented the 4 rivers of the Garden of Eden. And later on, they said that it represented earth, fire, air, and water. So I love that. I love that spiritual significance of the beginning of the potager garden. So from this original design of the potager garden became this beautiful marriage of an English utilitarian style kitchen garden and the French ornate style garden. So that's where we're at with the potager gardens today. It's a marriage of the two. So basically a potager garden is just a diverse mixture of fruits, berries, vegetables, herbs, flowers. It's not only a beautiful, aesthetically pleasing garden, but it provides what you need. It provides food, it provides medicine, it provides household products like things to clean your home with. The peasants would harvest herbs from the garden and take them into their home to deter rats and rodents and bugs and stuff. And they would harvest flowers and take them into their home, and that was their decor. And they would harvest herbs for any kind of personal needs that they had, like, to make rose water or whatever. So that's the idea of a potager garden. It sustains you, it helps provide food and medicine for you, but it is very beautiful and aesthetically pleasing.
The correlation between the history of the potager garden and what's taking place in the world today is very interesting to me. Definitely history is repeating itself. In the 1300s, there was also a pandemic called the bubonic plague pandemic, also known as the Black Death, and it originated in China also. This plague took estimated around 150 million lives that plague took, and it wiped out settlements and whole towns. Houses were abandoned. There was a shortage in manufactured goods and supplies. It stopped trade and travel. Quarantines were put into effect. Does any of this sound familiar? But because of all of these things happening, it greatly affected the economy and the social ladder. The social status of the classes of people was greatly changed and affected by this plague. Because the aristocrats and the wealthy, they owned all of these big land holdings, and all of their land and their property, their settlements. They had nobody to work the land. They had nobody to grow the crops or harvest the crops or work their land. So what they did is they started building these little thatched roofed cottage houses. And they put an acre or two with each house, and they rented it out to the peasants. See, they knew that the peasants were really, really hard workers. So they rented this land and this home out to them. Before this pandemic, peasants did not have the opportunity or the ability to ever own property, ever. This was reserved, land and property was reserved only for the aristocrats and for the wealthy. So they could have never owned land before this pandemic happened. The pandemic actually gave the peasants the ability to better their lives, to be able to grow their own food and sustain and care for themselves. So the way these were designed was the cottage house, the little thatched roof cottage house was in the center, and then there was like little squares of property around the house. Well, the peasants were really hard workers, and they used every square inch of this property to grow their gardens, to grow vegetables, to grow herbs, to grow their own medicine, to grow flowers for their home. They didn't have inside plumbing, so they brought in flowers and herbs and different fragrances to help with that smell, and like I told you guys earlier, to help deter rats and rodents and insects, and just for decoration in their home. So they grew all of these things in their gardens, and they would just walk right out their kitchen door with their basket in hand and go harvest their meals for the day. And they even had some small farm animals. Some of them had honeybees. So they used every square inch of this piece of property that they were able to rent to better their lives and sustain themselves. This is where we get that typical 4-square design of a potager garden, because usually in the beginning, the potager garden had the cottage home in the center and the beds around, and the little gardens and farms around the house. In most of our potager gardens that you see today, we have some kind of structure in the center, whether it be like an arbor or a big container with a big huge fruit tree or something like that in it, or fountains, or even like garden sheds, or sometimes even our homes like the peasants had. That would be the center, and then the garden is around it, and usually it's designed in like 4 squares or 4 geometric shapes around that structure. So this is kind of where it originated from, with the peasants and their cottage homes with their 4 squares of garden and farm spaces around their home being the center.
So I'm definitely not from France. I've never even been to France. I haven't been to Europe. I haven't seen the European gardens or any of that yet. It is on my bucket list, and I'm determined that one day Jean and I are going to go there. But I am about as southern as you're gonna get. I'm from Alabama, lived here most all of my life, went to college in Atlanta for just a little while. But mostly I've been in Alabama my whole life, so I am about as southern can get. So why don't I just call my garden a southern kitchen garden? Why do I call it a potager garden? Well, there's many reasons. First of all, I love the history of gardens, and I just think that the potager gardens, the old English cottage gardens, these gardens just have a rich history, and I love the history about them. And I love that the potager garden is just a sweet marriage of the English cottage garden style, which is my absolute favorite style, and the French style. The English cottage garden is more of a style of a wild, beautiful, informal style garden where annuals are allowed to reseed and perennials are allowed to spread and sprawl, and it's ever changing. And I love that cottage garden style. And the French style is more of an ornate, formal, controlled style. So I love the marriage between the two of the formal bones and the formal structure of the garden. Like most of my beds in the Potager garden have a lot of formal lines and a lot of structural pieces. Like I have some boxwoods that I'm adding to my garden, and just that structure and that formality. But it also has that cottage garden style, that free, wild, informal style. And I love that sweet marriage of the two. And just the fact of the diversity that's in a potager garden. You've got herbs and flowers and vegetables and roses and boxwoods and just all the diversity that's out here. Not only does this garden provide me food, it provides me medicine, it provides me home decor, it provides me beauty products. It provides a habitat for bees and butterflies and hummingbirds and nature, and just the diversity of the potager garden is just beautiful to me. And also, I'm kind of designing my gardens and my orchard with spiritual significance. So I'm studying a little bit about the Garden of Eden and the Garden of Gethsemane, and how those gardens were laid out and designed, and the significance of all the different parts of the garden. And I'm kind of loosely designing my gardens with some of that same spiritual significance and elements that are in those gardens in the Bible. And I absolutely loved the fact that the original potager garden design, the 4 square beds, was believed to represent the 4 rivers in the Garden of Eden in paradise. So I really loved that too. And lastly, why not call it a potager garden? I mean, potager just sounds so romantic and captivating. Why wouldn't I call it a potager? And you know, in this big old world of trouble that we're in, my goal, my purpose in creating these videos is to hopefully be able to offer you a little bit of encouragement, a little bit of inspiration, be able to share with you the knowledge that I have of growing gardens and growing food, so that hopefully I can help you to be able to get in the garden and create these gardens, to be able to grow food to help sustain and take care of your family's needs, and to help you create a space that you can hopefully find refuge in, a space that feeds your soul. Okay, I'm going to wrap up episode 1 right here. I look forward to seeing you all on episode 2, where we will be talking about the elements of a potager garden. God bless you all. I wish you all the very, very best. I wish you health and peace and joy, and I look forward to seeing y'all soon.